Hello again, welcome to the bridge between Galicia and Scotland, and let's have a look at the Spanish press. There were a lot of news reported in the Spanish newspapers. For example, this Scotland bans the smacking, but the beast from the east was all over the Spanish newspapers and TVs. But surely you're well informed about that.
There was criticism today from the First Minister for some HGV drivers who ignored the red weather warning to stay off the roads.
And I do think we have to be very clear in the message we are sending to companies who deliver goods with HGVs. And this is not a criticism of drivers, because driver safety is one of the important issues here.
Oops. Spanish newspaper reported this, but no, they were not so partisan. There were also a lot of news about Brexit and a letter from the 62 Tory MPs, by the way, 4 of them Scottish Tory MPs, to Theresa May were also reported on some newspapers. Also the official position of Corbyn on Brexit, and the answer from Nicola Sturgeon that she would like to see more commitment from Jeremy Corbyn on the single market, the staying in the single market. And there was also in some newspapers. We received the visit of the British ambassador Simon Miley in Galicia. La Voz de Galicia reported his visit and published an interview with Simon Miley. Simon Miley explained that the British people are very, very proud of the Galician immigrants and that nothing is going to change with Brexit. He was also explaining that the fisheries is the most complicated issue to be negotiated in Brexit. So let's have a look, let's wait and see what happened with fisheries. But also the Spanish media reported how Scotland is trying to protect the whisky businesses, and also that 70% of the enterprises, Scottish enterprises, want to stay, support to stay in the single market, and of course the devolution problem and the different views from the Scottish and the British governments. The Spanish media reported that Scotland and the UK are not, they don't get an agreement on this issue. And well, it's curious because the Spanish newspaper reported that Scotland wants to stay in the single market. That they highlight the 62% of the population of Scotland who voted to remain in the single market. Apart from that, I want to share some views on my tweets. This one of the tweets that you retweeted the most. Apparently, there were a debate that not many people watched the debate. You watch the BBC but know the debate. And I do enjoy listening to the First Minister questions and also some debate, because I think they are now debates very, very important. The Scottish government presented the continuity bill as an emergency bill, and I was just, what is an emergency bill? This is an emergency bill.
In terms of the emergency, this is an emergency in almost any definition you wish to apply. It's an emergency in terms of the timing of this. The EU withdrawal bill from the UK government was published on the 13th of July last year. On the 19th of September last year, the Welsh and Scottish governments brought forward their amendments. We had nothing in writing in terms of an amendment to the bill from the UK government until the second half of February this year. We have shown extraordinary restraint in the process of negotiation in terms of trying to get the change which in November and early December the UK government accepted they wanted to bring forward. And there is still no tabling of that amendment. So it is an emergency. I agree with Tavish Scott. Brexit itself is an emergency. But it's an emergency in the sense of the way in which the UK government has treated the two other governments engaged in this. Regrettably, there is no government in Northern Ireland, by refusing to accept that they have a responsibility to bring these matters forward timorously. But there's also an emergency in the definition that Donald Cameron used. He used the words unique and ad hoc. Brexit is a unique set of circumstances, and the circumstance, the ad hoc circumstance that brought us here, is the impending failure of those negotiations, despite the good efforts of the Welsh and Scottish governments to try and get change.
I'm learning a lot. I'm learning a lot about the procedures in the Scottish Parliament, because some people were arguing that this continuity bill was not compatible with some laws, some current laws. And suddenly I discovered that Lord Advocate has a face, and he was explaining this.
It is not incompatible with EU law to make provision to deal with the inevitable consequences in domestic law of withdrawal from the EU in this way. Indeed, that appears to be the basis upon which the United Kingdom government's own EU withdrawal bill, upon which this bill has been modelled, proceeds. If that is right, and if contrary to the view of the Scottish Government, this bill is incompatible with EU law, then the same reasoning would apply equally to the UK Government's bill. Presiding Officer, in your assessment of legislative competence, you put your finger on the central point which arises in relation to this bill, that it contains provisions and empowers ministers to make provision by regulations, which, if they were to come into force before the UK leaves the EU, would be incompatible with EU law. And you characterise this as involving an exercise of competence before the competence has been transferred. But the Scottish Government's view is that this bill is framed to ensure that any provisions which would have that effect can only come into force when the UK leaves the EU. As the presiding officer of the National Assembly for Wales has concluded in the context of the Welsh Government's bill, that makes all the difference and ensures that there is and can be no incompatibility between the provisions of this bill and EU law.
The continuity bill wasn't only for Scotland. There was also a continuity bill in Wales, and there was reported in some newspapers that Wales and Scotland presented an alternative legislation for Brexit, for the period after Brexit. Why the presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament disagree with the emergency of this bill and the compatibility of this bill? Well, let's listen to the Lord Advocate again.
The first point to make clear is that the Scottish Government is satisfied that this is a bill which is within the legislative competence of this Parliament. I am not, although the Welsh constitutional settlement is different from the settlement in Scotland, and there are differences in the approach of the two bills, I'm not aware of any relevant difference bearing on the critical issue on which the two presiding officers have disagreed with one another. So that's the first point. The second point is that, as the presiding officer, I think, recognised in his statement yesterday, a negative certificate from the presiding officer does not prevent this Parliament debating and, if so advised, passing a bill.
The debate was very, very, very intense, and I really recommend you to follow the debate on the Scottish Parliament website because it's absolutely passionate. But the start of this debate definitely was Patrick
to be
Harvey.
a professor of constitutional law to spot the glaring and manifest inconsistency with what the SNP is saying.
If he's used the same indignant voice to David Mundell, the minister who is in the government which has failed. The minister in the government which has repeatedly failed to make the UK bill remotely acceptable or compatible with devolution. I don't think any of us would imagine that this situation is perfect or can be made perfect. But does he accept that if we fail to take responsibility for examining and debating and passing Scottish legislation in this chamber, we will leave the UK government with a perfect excuse to impose something upon us which we have all across this chamber decided is unacceptable?
Neil Findlay.
I certainly do have some sympathy.
Patrick Harvey was on fire.
Thank you, and can I assure the member that the only people having fun in this situation are expensively educated idiots like Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson.
Mr. Harvey, Mr. Harvey, Mr. Harvey, the members that you named are not members of this Parliament, but I still urge you to be respectful to everybody you describe in this chamber.
I certainly.
Order, please. Sorry, I will allow Mr. Cameron. I will allow you the extra minute to just allow Mr. Cameron to finish his question, if he makes it.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I certainly offer those gentlemen the respect they deserve.
All right, Mr. Harvey. That's quite enough.
Mr. Cameron.
Mr. Harvey, that's quite enough. That's quite enough, Mr. Harvey. The result of the vote on motion 10735 in the name of Michael Russell is yes 86, no 27. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed.
Well, obviously, the bad language and bad behaviour are not allowed in the Scottish Parliament, but obviously Patrick Harvey said something that many think. There's going to be a very intense debate in weeks ahead. And of course, let's finish this for summary. Calcutta for winning the Calcutta Cup. That's what a match. You can follow me by my blog, pilaraymara.com, also by my Twitter account @pilaraymara, and by my Facebook page, O Mundo de Pilar Aymara, Pilar Aymara's World. If you have any question, please let me know. I'll be happy to answer all your questions about Spain, about politics, Catalonia, Galicia, etc. And I'm really looking forward to visiting Scotland very soon. And I have some surprises for you because I'll be interviewing some, I think, interesting, very interesting people. So I'll see you in next video, but I'll see you in Scotland very soon. Bye.